The principle of secession, Lincoln said, is death to popular government. I've already read one passage where he says that. It means, in effect, that a losing minority in any democratic vote reserves the right not to be bound by the majority decision. Plainly, this is a quotation. This is from the first inaugural address. Plainly, the central idea of secession is the essence of anarchy. If a minority is not bound to acquiesce in the constitutional decisions of the majority and secedes instead, and again a quotation, they make a precedent which in turn will divide and ruin them. For a minority of their own will secede from them whenever a majority refuses to be controlled by them. For instance, he asks, why may not any portion of a new confederacy a year or two hence arbitrarily secede again, precisely as portions of the present union now claim to secede from it? So the doctrine of secession suggests itself naturally to those who see the origin of government in compact, or contract, or consent, which is itself an inference from the proposition that all men are created equal. And Lincoln's analysis shows precisely why the Civil War is a test of that nation's ability to endure. Because the principle of secession as a principle of anarchy will destroy any free government if it is accepted, yet it is a highly plausible theory in regimes dedicated to propositions like the American proposition. It's the argument against the rightfulness of secession, even in a regime based on consent, that led Lincoln to that jarring obstetric imagery of the fathers becoming pregnant and giving birth. Through their consent, they gave birth to a nation that is an organic and indivisible whole, because what they freely gave birth to was a democratic republic. It is death to government of the people by the same people for dissident groups to be free to hie off whenever they do not like the outcome of a free vote. That way lies anarchy and destruction of free government. So the second paragraph of the Gettysburg Address immerses Lincoln and his audience in the present time and place, and which he insists cannot be understood apart from the task bequeathed them by the fathers, a task that requires as much of them as was required of the fathers. So the last paragraph turns to the question, what is to be done? Next slide, please. Okay. Now the last part of the address, as you can see by the smaller print up on the screen, is by far the longest and the most complex in form of the three. And he begins his third paragraph, you might notice, by almost contradicting the conclusions of the second paragraph. In the second paragraph, he had said it was fitting and proper for us in the present to be present here at Gettysburg, to dedicate a portion of that field of battle as a final resting place for the Union dead. But the third paragraph opens with a but, a clear announcement of a change in direction. But, what is thought to be altogether fitting and proper cannot really be done by us. The dead have already dedicated their final resting place more than Lincoln or his fellow assembled mourners can do. After all, what can they, the living, do that can, or say that can match what the dead themselves gave in order to earn that final resting place? It is not asking all that much of the survivors to say a few words or even to shovel a few spadefuls of dirt over them. And if all the survivors do is that, Lincoln is right when he says the world will little note nor long remember what we say here. But Lincoln did not stop there. Our task as the living survivors is not simply to memorialize the dead as though dedication to what is already achieved is sufficient. The living have a task before them. The living must preside over a new birth of freedom. The living generation faces a task quite strictly parallel to the great task of our fathers. It too must give birth to freedom, not merely to restore or to preserve the past, but to extend it. It is tempting to read Lincoln's statement about the future in the light of the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche's essay, very well-known essay he wrote on the role of history in the life of peoples. Nietzsche had identified three kinds of history which are written and which are useful to peoples, each of which has its uses and also its disadvantages. The first kind is what Nietzsche called monumental history. This is the story of great men and great deeds that found new things. As a form of history, it can inspire people in the present to do great deeds as well. Antiquarian history, the second kind, is the cherishing memory of the past. It can be preservative of the past, It keeps a nation moored in its past and thus provides for continuity of identity. It is the kind of history to which Lincoln appeals at the close of his first inaugural address, when he evokes, in a beautiful phrase, the mystic chords of memory stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone. As he makes clear, this kind of appeal has a conservative and a preservative character. The loving appeal to those mystic chords of memory has its preservative effect, but it can also be stultifying. There is such a thing as the dead hand of the past. Thus, Nietzsche identifies a third form of history, what he calls critical history. This kind of history turns a critical eye to the past, stealing from it its aura of sacredness and awe. This too can be useful in the life of a people because it helps clear the ground for new action by allowing a people to win freedom from its own past. Now, to many observers, Lincoln appears to be an antiquarian in Nietzsche's sense. He invokes the fathers with all the sentimentality and language of sacredness and awe that we associate with biblical Christianity in 19th century America. Yet I think that's an insufficiently subtle understanding of what Lincoln is saying or doing. I think it's almost the case that each of Lincoln's 3 paragraphs embodies one of Nietzsche's 3 types of history. The first paragraph directly presses toward antiquarian history, remind us of our fathers, all the great things they did, and so on. The second, though, moves towards critical history because in its quiet way it points to the limitations of the achievements of our fathers. That is, this great mess we're in is what they've left us. The new nation which they brought forth may not be able to endure. It is convulsed in a great war, which war represents an intrinsic crisis internal to what they gave us, not something that came from the outside. At the least, Lincoln concludes, the founders did not complete the task that they embarked on. And the third paragraph moves us back into the sphere of monumental history. Heroic acts are to be done, and it is this present generation which is to do them, not the departed race of our fathers. We are not, Lincoln is telling his audience, a mere race of too late comers who have come after all the important and good stuff has been done. But Lincoln, I think, differs from Nietzsche also in one important respect. The task that he assigns to we the living is not to make anew entirely, not to indulge in critical history to the point of disregarding our ties or our reverence for the fathers. Rather, we the living should do what they did. Bring forth something free, something dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Our task is both the same and in profound continuity with the fathers, and at the same time new and a break with the fathers. The key to the Gettysburg Address, indeed, is this theme of dedication. The founders were dedicated to something, the proposition that all men are created equal and the equality of natural rights. That dedication can never be completed or exhausted. To be true to our fathers means not to preserve every jot and tittle of what they did, though it does mean to preserve what's good in what they did, but above all to preserve their dedication to their project. Building a political community on the basis of dedication to our fathers, then, is an ongoing and, it seems, infinitely difficult task. Lincoln differs from Nietzsche in affirming that all 3 kinds of history can or perhaps must coexist. Nietzsche worried that devotion to the past can dwarf the human beings of the present, and thus he looked to the possibility of simply new beginnings. Lincoln sees the great deeds of the future, if they are to be truly great and just deeds, in the continued dedication of the dead fathers, which implies in itself, within it, great new tasks. In Lincoln, then, as opposed to Nietzsche, past, present, and future hold together, not seamlessly to be sure, but genuinely. Genuinely, if there is a Lincoln to show how to do it. Thus, the inability of the living to truly dedicate the cemetery at Gettysburg is not merely a negative result of their inability to bring anything weighty enough to that field, but more importantly, that inability flows from the fact that their task of dedication is a different task than mere memorializing. The mystic chords of memory are springboards into the future, which future contains of necessity the need for a new birth. But what is the new birth to which Lincoln calls the nation at Gettysburg?